Yo, what's going on, YouTube, and welcome to Goal Line Hockey Live. It's Kevin Forte, and today we are back for live stream. I don't know how long this one's going to go. I'm expecting to go for at least a half hour. That's kind of my goal for today. But I wanted to start getting back into the live stream realm. I'm trying to do a live stream once a week. So if you guys can, definitely stay tuned for those live streams. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, and make sure you follow us here on the channel. That way you're up to date with the community. When I'll be going live, I let everybody know who's subscribed and has notifications on this morning. We will be going live this afternoon. Also, to make sure to check out our, I think it's called Discord. So a bunch of the guys are in there as well. So make sure to check that out. All those links are either in the banner here on the channel, or they are also in the description down below. I love hockey. Thank you for joining us. I love is that Sidney Crosby? Nice to see that. So thank you for joining us. So it's funny that we have a Penguins fan in here because today we're going to talk about the most overrated teams in the National Hockey League. Now, this is obviously, I'm a channel that doesn't like to do opinions. I like to do based off of statistics. This guy's here, this guy's there, and there's not much gray area. But in this type of video, it's more about your opinion. So I picked one team from each division, the Metropolitan, the Atlantic, the Central, and the Pacific. We're going to be going over one overrated team in each division. So, there's kind of the way I kind of made this out to be is, I've looked at a bunch of and on Reddit and the way that people are kind of thinking about their teams going into this season. And of course, stay tuned because I will be doing an most underrated teams going into this season as well. So make sure to stay tuned for that as well. But I want to start off in the Western Conference and specifically the Pacific Division, because this one was actually the most difficult, was the Pacific, because you look at most of the teams, everybody kind of knows where they're at, right? Obviously, the Vegas Golden Knights had just won the Stanley Cup, so we know Vegas is going to be pretty good this year. That's the expectation, and I would expect them to be pretty good. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, which is just the teams that are rebuilding and are not any good, and that is teams like Anaheim, San Jose. We know where they're at. But then there's those teams that are probably either the expectations are maybe a little too high, where you've got a team like LA, who we expect to make the playoffs, but they aren't a lock to make the playoffs. And then you've got the Oilers. So the way I kind of look at this division, the Seattle Kraken are the most overrated team in this division. And the reason I say that is because the way I look at the Seattle Kraken, this is a team that has a ton of talent, no doubt about it. You're not going to get any question from me in that regard. But to be honest with you, Dave Haxtell is a decent coach. But I think that last year, I think they had that little bit of a lightning in a bottle. And I think they have the same effect as Vegas in their first couple seasons, in the sense that a bunch of guys that were maybe you almost couldn't have done the expansion draft wrong, in my opinion, for the last two, right? Between Seattle and Vegas, you couldn't have done the expansion draft necessarily wrong. So those first couple years, that's going to be a really good team. And we might actually see a little bit of a dip in the team like we saw with Vegas before they ultimately come back up the right way. And we start to see them really establish themselves about 5 years into that expansion. So the way I look at Seattle, the biggest issue I have with the Seattle Kraken is the goaltending. Very, very concerning going into next season. Philip Grubauer, Chris Driedger, and Joey Daccord. Those are the three guys that we should be looking at for the Seattle Kraken, as that is my main reason why I think that Seattle will be overrated. A lot of people have them going back to the playoffs this year. You look at what they did last year. They beat the Colorado Avalanche in the first round of the playoffs. That was huge for the Seattle Kraken. But to expect them to be able to do something similar to that this year, you're asking for a lot. And I just don't think they're going to be there this season. Joey Daccord's record, he spent most of last season with the Coachella Valley Firebirds, which they ended up going to the Calder Cup finals where they lost to Hershey. And Joey Daccord was a part of that. Chris Driedger did play a couple of games last year. Definitely a lot more than Joey Daccord. Daccord only played 5. Different story here for Chris Driedger. He played 27 games last year. He had a sub 900 save percentage, which obviously that has to improve. And the biggest one being Philip Grubauer. Grubauer is the starting goaltender there in Seattle, and he had an 895 save percentage through 40 games last season. And he has not had a 900 save percentage since his last season in Colorado in the 2020-2021 season. So it's been now 3 seasons going into this year. It'll be 3 seasons since we have seen a above 900 save percentage for Philip Grubauer. And that is very concerning because let's be honest, unless Chris Driedger or Joey Daccord completely goes off, there's no real life preserver there. There's no lifeline here for the Seattle Kraken in between the pipes. It's going to rely a lot on Grubauer, and I'm not necessarily sold on that. And they don't really have a goaltender that's going to bail them out sometimes and just win a game for them. I'm just not that confident they will be able to do that. I love their blue line. I think Ron Francis, even in his time in Carolina, his ability to develop and really draft and bring in defensemen, you're not seeing anything from me in that regard. That is not, I have no question. Bring back Vince Dunn. That was a great move there by the Kraken. You've got Alexiak, Larson. Brian Dumoulin, I think, was a welcome addition if he can stay healthy. I think that's the big issue there. They did sign him to a 2-year deal, so I have some genuine concerns about that. But other than that, I think that they have a pretty good blue line. They're starting to build up that forward group. I think a lot more of the focus is going to be on the younger guys this season. They have Schwartz, Eberle, Bjorkstrand, and Yanni Gourde, as well as Jared McCann. But I think we're going to start to see some of these other guys. We saw a little bit of an emergence from Eli Tolvanen last year, Cole Lind, and absolutely Matt Beniers is in that conversation as well. And, when I look at this team, you still have guys like Shane Wright and, Ty Kartai and Ryan Winton and some of these guys that played in the American Hockey League last year. Again, that Coachella Valley Firebirds team had a really good run in the Calder Cup playoffs going all the way to the finals. So I'm definitely keeping an eye here on the Seattle Kraken as a team that, they definitely have some bright spots, but the reality is that goaltending is very concerning for me, and it's hard to win in this league and especially make the playoffs without goaltending. Like another team we're going to mention here in a minute, we'll get to them in a minute. Goaltending is huge, and I'm not sold on the Seattle Kraken's goaltending, and I have them missing the playoffs this year. I think they're a little bit overrated. So that's our team in the Pacific Division, but staying in the Western Conference. And guys, thank you for joining us. A bunch of you guys are commenting in the chat. It's nice to see you all again. Make sure to like the video. It definitely will help us out here at the channel, get some more people in here to watch this unbelievable live stream, because you guys know we only do it the best here at Goal Line Hockey. We've also got some new merch. We had a merch drop earlier this month. We've got Goal Line Hockey hats. We've got shirts. They definitely fit pretty good, so make sure to check that stuff out. So like I said, so there's the Seattle Kraken. So now we're going to head to the Central Division. And we're going to take a look at, there was 2 teams I was kind of on the fence about in the Central. I think Colorado's going to be okay. I think we saw last year, even without Gabe Landeskog, this is a team that's been able to just weather that. They have some concerns about the goaltending, and I think that's definitely fair. But they don't have, again, it's different compared to Seattle. Seattle just has, they don't have that star power like Colorado does at the top. So I definitely made an argument to Minnesota. Minnesota was a strong candidate there, but I ended up going with the Dallas Stars. I think the Dallas Stars are the most overrated team in the Central Division. And here's why. So the reason I think that the Dallas Stars are the most overrated team in that Central Division, I just think this team is continuing to age, and that age is starting to wear thin. And it's kind of the opposite of the Seattle Kraken, in the sense that I think Jake Ottinger is a really good goalie. Yeah, he got burnt out at the end of the last season, no doubt about that. But I'm not sold on the star power of Dallas. Now, that defense is incredible. Miro Heiskanen is a top 5 defenseman in the National Hockey League, and I don't think you're going to see much arguments to that point. But that group up front is definitely a little bit worrisome. And this isn't necessarily a knock against Matt Duchene, but the fact they're looking to Matt Duchene as their guy to bring in this summer, definitely worrisome for Jim Nill and the Dallas Stars. Jamie Benn had some promising moments last season, sort of a renaissance point, but it quickly tailed off. And it's not something that I would really rely on at this point for a 34-year-old power forward in the National Hockey League. And his point production definitely went up. He was basically a point per game last season. But is that the rule, or is that the outlier? Because since the last time he was in the conversation for the Art Ross Trophy, which I believe he won in the 2017-2018 season. And I remember that season because John Tavares was also in the running for the Art Ross Trophy that season. That's the last season he was basically a point per game. Ever since then, now it's been 5 seasons. He's only had a point per game, close to a point per game season once in those 5 seasons. And thank you for the super chat, Surreal. Thank you for the $1 Canadian. Had nothing to say, but thank you for that super chat. I really appreciate that. Surreal, huge supporter here at the channel. So back to what I was saying, the way I'm kind of looking at this whole thing with Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin, they had their run, and I just don't think they have enough gas in the tank up front to kind of keep it going. Now, there is a caveat to this, and that's why I was kind of timid in making this point, because the emergence of some of the younger guys in Dallas could definitely change that. And if you haven't watched my season preview video on the Dallas Stars yet, I believe that's coming out. That actually came out today, I think. But either way, the way I look at a guy like Rupe Hintz and some of those other younger players, even a guy like Wyatt Johnston, those are going to be critical pieces to the Dallas Stars kind of transitioning, because I look at this year as a transition year for the Dallas Stars in the sense that I think they're going to have a lot of younger guys that don't have enough experience to get them on that deep playoff run or even to make the playoffs. And I think some of the veteran guys are going to be over the edge at the point where I don't think they're going to be able to be productive enough to get Dallas to the playoffs. So it's going to be that kind of middle ground where they've got just a bunch of really decent players, but nobody that puts them over the edge. And I think as the emergence of guys like Jason Robertson, Rupe Hintz, Wyatt Johnston, what's his name? Maverick Bork, as some of those guys up front develop, I'm definitely thinking the future is bright for Dallas. But for this coming season and from what they've done the last couple of years, going on a couple of runs here with Pete DeBoer, we know Pete DeBoer's shelf life isn't necessarily that long either. So if you follow history, it would prove that it's probably not looking good for the Dallas Stars. But maybe they prove me wrong. But as of right now, my opinion is I think they are a little bit overrated there in the Central Division. So that's our Western Conference teams. We've got Seattle in the Pacific Division, and in the Central Division, we've got the Dallas Stars. But there's definitely reason to kind of say there's a couple teams that are in that conversation. Especially in the Central Division. I think that's going to be a lot more competitive division. And we'll talk about this in other videos, but I think St. Louis is a team to really watch this season. Nashville could be kind of interesting with some of the moves they've made. Barry Trotz being there, UC Saros. We've seen how good of a goalie he's been. The emergence of maybe a Yaroslav Askarov on top of that. This is a really potentially interesting division there in the Central. And I think that Dallas could be one of the teams that was in last year that falls out because of the emergence of some of the other teams in that division. All right, so Seattle and Dallas now heading to the Eastern Conference. Now, these are going to be a little bit controversial, I think, because especially this first team in the Atlantic Division. And this one's kind of tough because the way I kind of look at overrated, it's a team that's been good for the last couple of years, and we're caught in the lull of just, well, they've always been in the playoffs, so we just assume they're going to be back. And I don't think that's going to be the case for this specific team in the Atlantic. And that is the Boston Bruins. I know, it sounds crazy because the Boston Bruins had an incredible season last year. They had 135 points last season, one of the best records in NHL history in general in terms of a regular season. The way I look at the Boston Bruins, it is a genuine concern in the sense that how good Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman are last year, will they be able to repeat that this year, right? And let's be honest, the huge elephant in the room is that new center core. The fact that you no longer have Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, you cannot tell me that the Bruins have anybody in this franchise that's going to quickly replace one of or both of those players. So, yeah, I mean, there's some people out there that are saying still, hey, listen, even if Boston, let's say they have the same team, right? But they have 30 less points, they still make the playoffs. Yeah, but you got to remember at the end of the season, they were kind of sleepwalking their way to the end of the season. They were just winning games, not even trying. Like everything was going well for the Bruins. And that's not a discredit to that team because that was a super talented, veteran led team. Not taking away from any of the success of the Bruins, but let's be honest, that's kind of what did them in the playoffs, right? They just kind of lulled their way to sleep at the end of the season, and they kind of got the doors beat off of them toward the end of that series against the Florida Panthers, and the will just wasn't there. And I think they were kind of just looking ahead to what could be that season, and they kind of just stumbled their way up the stairs in the first round, and we don't know what the story could have been after that. So, it's kind of tough, looking at Boston because this is definitely one that I think a lot of people will disagree with me on. They've got a good blue line, right? Charlie McAvoy, Derek Forbert, even some of the guys that nobody really talks about as much. Brandon Carlo, Hampus Lindholm, Matt Grzelcyk, Jakub Zaboral. They bring in Ian Mitchell and Kevin Shattenkirk. So there's some veteran depth on this Boston team, but I got to be honest. I think that the expectations for Omar and Swayman to do what they did last year again this year is a lot. And like I said, that center core, unless we see a huge emergence from guys like Jesper Boqvist or Morgan Geekie, you're expecting way too much from Pavel Zacha and Charlie Coyle as you're more than likely 1 and 2 centers next season. I just don't think that's going to happen. So I have the Boston Bruins as my overrated team going into this season in the Atlantic Division. Because here's the other thing, and this is kind of part of it. You got to remember that with teams like Ottawa, Buffalo, Detroit, even Montreal to a certain extent, nobody's expecting them to really make the playoffs, or it would be kind of surprising for them to get in, right? So unless you look at maybe a team like Florida that you think could really stumble to start this season and maybe not get off on the right foot, similar to what they did last year, and again, expecting them to repeat what they did last year, I can make an argument for Florida, but I figured we'd go with the team that nobody else is going to go with. Nobody's going to say that the Boston Bruins are going to fall off this season, or very few people, I would think. I'm going to go with that as my pick, and I think they tried fixing it up, trying to bring in Lucic and James Van Riemsdyk, but they are shells of their former self. And I hope they prove me wrong because I like them as hockey players. They're very well respected in the game, but this is a team that if you're looking at in terms of where is that guy that is going to change the momentum in a series, it is Brad Marchand and David Pastrnak. And those are very good players, but that is not the same caliber of what they had with Patrice Bergeron. You cannot tell me losing Patrice Bergeron is not maybe the biggest loss in a long, long time for the Boston Bruins. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think down below, but I don't know. The way I look at it, I think Boston is a little overrated going into this year. Because again, we're just expecting them to run it back like they did last year without a ton of those big players. Okay. So that leads us to our next team, and that is in the Metropolitan Division. But before we get there, I do want to say a quick shout out to some of you guys here in the chat. Shout out to Mario, Mario V, huge supporter here at the channel. Surreal, Morgan, thank you for joining us. Urban, all you guys, thank you so much for jumping here into the channel. You guys are the best. It's nice to see you guys in here. So like I said, so let's get to the Metropolitan Division. So in the Metro, my team that I think is the most overrated, we know how good Dallas is. I mean, the Devils are. I think the Devils are going to be a good team in that division. I think Carolina is going to be very strong. But then we start to get to this kind of weird category where you've got teams like the Islanders, the Rangers. You could say maybe Columbus, but I don't think anybody's expecting Columbus to make the playoffs. Washington. And then at the bottom of the barrel, you've got Philadelphia. But who is the other team in the Keystone State? And that is the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Pittsburgh Penguins, I think, are the most overrated team in the Metropolitan Division. And here's why. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins, now we know the easy thing to say is they are a victim of their success. And this is a Penguins team that is similar to Boston in we're starting to see maybe that sense of just guys that are starting to age out. And it's similar to Dallas. It's similar to Boston. I think Pittsburgh is along the same lines here. They're trying to run it back with Tristan Jarry as their starting goalie. That is very concerning. Now, I know that Kyle Dubas obviously sees something in him. He's had a above 900 save percentage every season in Pittsburgh, other than I think his third season. So his first and third season, he had a below 900 save percentage. Every other year, he's been good. But the more concerning thing the last 2 years, specifically for Tristan Jarry in the playoffs, is he has not been very good. In the 2020 and 2021 playoffs, not good. And that is something that I'm very concerned about, because if you're expecting Alex Nedeljkovic to come in and save the day for the Pittsburgh Penguins in the playoffs, or even to get to the playoffs, you might want to hold the brakes on that. And I love them bringing in Erik Karlsson. A lot of people are kind of criticizing that, saying, well, they already have that in Chris Letang and this and that. And that's fair. That's a fair criticism. But that's not the problem here. The problem is goaltending, and they didn't fix that. And this is something that everybody says, but somehow it gets lost in the weeds. Defense wins championships. Goalies get you to the playoffs. I strongly, strongly believe that. You need goaltending, especially in today's NHL. And I don't even think necessarily Pittsburgh has one good goalie, let alone two. And you look at teams, even in that division, let's just say hypothetically, let's say it's the final week of the season. There's 2 playoff spots left. You've got 4 teams trying to make the playoffs in the Metropolitan Division. You've got Washington, the Washington Capitals, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the New York Islanders, and the New York Rangers. There's 2 playoff spots. Of those 4 goalie tandems, which ones would you be the most confident in getting you to the playoffs? Let's say it was similar to this year, right? So Washington has Darcy Kemper and Ryan Lindgren, or Charlie Lindgren. My bad. The 2 Lindgrens, I mess them up sometimes. Charlie Lindgren and Darcy Kemper. Okay, that's not terrible. The Islanders, Varlamov and Sorokin. Call me biased. That is definitely top 2, maybe other than Boston, in terms of goalie tandems in the league. So I'm going with the Islanders and the Penguins, and the Capitals having better goaltending than the Penguins. And then Rangers, they have Shesterkin, and I don't know who the backup is for the Rangers. Is it Jonathan Quick? I would take Jonathan Quick and Igor Shesterkin over Nedeljkovic and Jarry any day. So of those 4 goalie tandems I just mentioned, in terms of fringe metropolitan teams, the Penguins are at the bottom of that list for goaltending. And the gap between Pittsburgh and everybody else in every other category, defense, forwards, everything else, is fairly the same. I don't think Pittsburgh gets in, and I think they are the most overrated team in the Metropolitan Division, because the expectations are fairly low for the Islanders and the Capitals going into this year. Everybody thinks they're both going to fall off. So if they make the playoffs, they actually would surprise some people. The Rangers could be another team to watch, similar to Pittsburgh. They could fall off this year, depending on how things go, but they still got Panarin. They've still got some really good players on the Rangers. So I'm not saying they're going to miss the playoffs, but if things bounce a certain way, who knows? And that's where you kind of fall into the twilight zone, where you have teams like Pittsburgh and Washington, who have been the cream of the crop in the Metropolitan Atlantic Division for the last couple of years. That's going to start to change with the emergence of Carolina here the last couple of years. And I think New Jersey is a real difference maker in the Metro, because now that New Jersey, I think, is going to be competing for the Metropolitan Division for first place in the Metro next year, I think teams like Pittsburgh and Washington definitely have more to worry about in terms of their status of holding up in that division, because the Rangers and the Hurricanes always seem to be good. The Islanders kind of meddled around there for a little bit, but now New Jersey coming in there and being a mainstay in that division is definitely going to change the game in the Metro. And I think, like I said, I think the victims of that will be Washington and Pittsburgh. And as teams like Columbus and Philadelphia start to figure it out, they're not worried about what's going on in the playoff picture, because they're probably not making it. Unless Columbus really surprises people, it's just way too difficult of a division to win in. I think that's going to be a problem for them. So those are my four teams, and I'm going to try and answer some of your guys' questions. So if you're in the chat, don't be afraid to ask me some questions. Come here at the end of the show, I'm going to answer some of your guys' questions. So the most overrated teams going into this season, in my opinion, in the Western Conference, we've got the Seattle Kraken and the Dallas Stars. And in the Eastern Conference, it's the Boston Bruins and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Those are my picks. So obviously, it might be a little bit controversial, but I want to know your guys' thoughts down below. So I want to answer some of your questions. So thank you for joining us. I love hockey. Urban, John K, Mario, Surreal, you guys are the best. So let's take a look at what you guys are saying. So Urban said Arizona, Chicago, Winnipeg, St. Louis, Nashville, San Jose, Calgary, Anaheim, Vancouver, Pittsburgh, Ottawa, and Montreal are dumpster fires. Okay. Thank you, Urban. Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot. Oh, so you're saying St. Louis and Nashville. Interesting. Because I think St. Louis and Nashville, see, I think that division is going to be weird because you're a Minnesota Wild fan. So maybe you have a little more insight than even I do on that. But I think that St. Louis is actually a team to watch for to go on a real run next season. But again, it's the goaltending thing. They've got Joel Hofer, I think, and Jordan Binnington. And Jordan Binnington had some real success when they won the cup, but things have been a little bit weird since then. And if that's the case, that could be a real problem for St. Louis. So I'm kind of betting on the goaltending being better, but that's a really good, like in terms of the team overall, St. Louis has a really good group over there. But like you said, the goaltending is a concern. I love hockey said, who do you see playing on the third pair D-man on the right side for Pittsburgh? That's an interesting question. It seems like that's been a forever problem, even in the Hextall era. I remember them always asking in press conferences, like, who's going to be playing on that blue line next year, right? Because last year, everyone was talking about Mark Friedman. Like, is Mark Friedman going to be on the blue line next year? Like, what's going on? And, the Penguins took a lot of criticism for that depth. And right now, based off of cap friendly, it would be Carlson, Letang, and then Chad Ruhwedel or Ty Smith would be on that third pair. Ty Smith or Chad Ruhwedel. I don't know. I'm going to check daily faceoff too. I think that's they're pretty good. A lot of you guys don't like their line combinations, which is kind of, I don't know. I don't know how updated it is on daily faceoff. So on daily faceoff, they have Chad Ruhwedel. I would honestly put Ty Smith there. I think there's more upside in Ty Smith than Chad Ruhwedel, but that's a weird name to say. But that's kind of what I'm thinking here. So that's my pick there. But thank you, John K, for joining us. My Sabres will be a disappointment if the goaltending doesn't hold up. Nice show. Thank you very much there. I appreciate that, John K. Mario V said Hall and Foligno have something to prove in Chicago. That could be really interesting. Foligno is cooked. Yeah. John K said, your pick of Boston is risky. I picked them to falter last year. I ate crow for that prediction all year. And it's funny you say that, John K, because last year I said that this was the year that the Pittsburgh Penguins were falling off. And I said that last year. And I was kind of right because they missed the playoffs last year. And if, again, I look at Pittsburgh, if they missed the playoffs last year, they brought in Carlson. Absolutely. He's a good player. But is that going to be something that's going to make them a playoff team necessarily? I don't think so. I don't think he adds the structure to the blue line that they need. And that's been the knock, right, on this team. I think they should have gone after, if he could have stayed healthy, like an Eric Johnson. I think he would have been a really good fit there. But he ended up going to John K's team, the Buffalo Sabres. I think that was a huge underrated pickup. If Eric Johnson can stay healthy for the Buffalo Sabres and be a good veteran there, he's going to add some real structure to that blue line. I think that was a great pickup. But again, Carlson is, in terms of points, of course, he's a great defenseman. But other than that, how much is he going to provide for you? That's going to be kind of an interesting thing to watch for. Do you see Sid getting over 100 points? That's going to be interesting because a lot of that, I think, could depend on the Penguins' power play. And I'm going to check Hockey Reference here because if I remember correctly, last year, Pittsburgh's power play was not very good. I'm going to look at it now. So Pittsburgh's power play. Let's take a look. Of course, it's not loading correctly, but let's see here. Come on. Let's see. So their power play. So they had an above average power play. So let's look at Crosby. So Crosby had 93 points last season. Does Crosby hit 100 points? So interestingly enough, the last time Sidney Crosby hit 100 points in a season was the 2018-2019 season. Now, to be fair, we've also had COVID since then, which obviously played a factor in his point production. But he hasn't really been anywhere near a point per game player. No, I stand corrected. He's been above a point per game player since then, but he hasn't been able to get to that 100-point mark. That's really interesting. Oh, man, you kind of got me there. I love hockey. That's a really good question. I mean, this is kind of the cop-out answer, but it depends on the supporting cast around him. If we can see Gensel get to like a point per game level, Erik Karlsson comes in and is a quarterback on that power play, and that power play is booming and firing on all cylinders, I could see Crosby hitting 100 points next season. I think that's going to be an important factor here. But honestly, if it weren't for Erik Karlsson, I wouldn't even really consider it. I just think Karlsson, if he can do similar to what he did last year in San Jose, again this year with Pittsburgh, that's gonna be a pretty lethal power play. Just imagine Letang, Karlsson, Crosby, Malkin, and probably Gensel. That's a pretty good power play. That's pretty good. I don't know how sold I am on the depth of that team, but in terms of power play next year and trying to get those points, Crosby could do it. And I'm not worried about his health. I knock on wood. Crosby's been very healthy through his career. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say Crosby gets to 100 points this season, just to answer your question. Yes. Great question, though. You really got me there, though. All right, guys. I think that's going to do it for today. So it's kind of a short one, but I don't think it has to be that long just to drag out a live stream. I'm going to be trying to do live streams once a week. So if you are not already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you like this stream to pump it out to other people so they could also see this live stream. I want to see what you guys think, because this is kind of an interesting spot right now where we're seeing some teams in transition, like Boston, like Pittsburgh, like Dallas, and all three of those teams are on our overrated list. And really the theme of it is, I think, teams that have been in the playoffs and have had success in the postseason the last couple of years, which of those teams is going to start to fall off and falter? And I think these are some really good candidates that we should definitely be looking at. So let me know down below, which teams do you think are overrated going into the 2023-2024 season? I believe we're down to 50 days until the NHL season. So definitely make sure you are staying tuned. I am pumping out the season preview videos. We're going to be going over all 32 NHL teams. So make sure to stay tuned for that. We've already gone through a bunch of teams. We're about halfway at this point. So definitely stay tuned for those videos, because I'll be pumping them out here through the rest of the summer as we get ready for training camp and we get ready for eventually the preseason, which is coming up in about a month now. So it's definitely exciting. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe and like the video, and I will see you again next time. Peace.